Hey Rashad, welcome to All Walks of Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Hey Sean, nice to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. So, how have you been keeping yourself busy? This is something I generally ask the guests who come on. Like, what have you been doing during the COVID times?
So you know that I was lucky enough. I was lucky to become a father just few weeks before COVID struck.
Yeah.
So this COVID has been a blessing for me. I have spent. I'm spending entire day with my daughter, and I don't see any other way this would have been possible besides COVID.
Yeah.
So I wish it ends soon for the world, but for me it's just been in blessing in disguise.
No, I mean that's something that's people tell me about very often. Actually, they say that being a parent is one of the best things that happens to them because it's just something that they can't describe. It's something I don't know how to put in words because obviously I'm too young to, let's say, even talk about it, I guess.
No, it's possible to describe that. It's not as you grow older, you will look for sources of motivation to live. So you're here for 100 years.
Right.
You're gonna die. No one's gonna remember you. Probably they'll remember you for 500 years. Probably 1,000 years if you do something really good or do something really really bad. That's the only two ways to get. There'll be a lot of years in between. You'll realize that why am I even here?
Yeah.
But when you have a kid, it gives you a source of motivation. And stop questioning, a sense of meaning.
Yeah.
So majority of life is just trying to find a sense of meaning in whatever you do, and so that's it. So that's why it's so feels so great.
No, I think that's very true because in society we are moving more and more towards, let's say, moving towards outside religion because we're becoming more, let's say, not trusting religion or not believing in the name of God or whatever we may have in the so-called old-fashioned dogmas, and that's led us to create new dogmas in society. This is something I've talked about in, let's say, be it pseudo-liberalism, pseudo-feminism, pseudo-veganism even, is that we want to create these cults because that's how we are engineered as social beings. And we want to be
Exactly. You're a vegan because it suddenly gives you a meaning.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're a yes. Every person just finds something to stick on, and that gives them that meaning. So, as you said, all these cult ideologies come from that. There's been a huge spike in sale of small dogs. So, where does that come from? People want to be individual and still have the sense of. So one thing baby does is you're unconditionally unconditionally loving someone, and it's the same thing a pet offers. So people are now substituting babies for pets. That's happening, but they're fulfilling the same need and desire to find meaning. So you can find meaning by having kids. That's okay, but you can also find meaning by following ideologies. They could be harmless as being a vegan or extremely bad for the world by other forms of ideologies.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So let's get into your career because there's something I think not many people will know about you. So people know that you're coaching at Bachchan Bhutia Football School. You're a youth football coach there, but you started off as an engineer, like most Indian men have, I guess, in Indian society rather. So just walk me through that and why maybe you got into engineering and then later pursued the passion in football.
I got into engineering because my friends were giving an exam and I gave that exam. That's the only reason I got into engineering. And I think these days parents are more conscious of what they want to put their kids into. 10 years back, 15 years back, it was a little bit still mainstream engineering, medical sciences, some defined fields, and but I actually enjoyed my engineering experience, and it was I met lot of great people there. But I just got into it. So I enjoyed engineering. I played a lot of sports during engineering. It gave me a lot of free time. And colleges, the first degree of college, I think, is not really for career purposes, more for socializing purposes. So I was into engineering. I was also a football. We got Premier League back in TV when I was in class 10, so around 2002. That was the time Premier League actually came on TV. So that is when football in India actually started to pick up, and I started picking up football. So if you look at fans right now, if you talk to 18-year-olds right now and ask them which teams they support, so 70 to 80% will say Manchester City or Liverpool. If you ask the kids who were of my age back in 2003, 2004 who they support, 90% will say United or Arsenal. So it's just who you grow up with. So I grew up watching Arsenal, I grew up liking them and supporting them. I became a big fan, and then also Arsenal had this another cult ideology of playing the football in a certain way and doing the things the right way, and that appealed more beyond football to me. So I got stuck into that. So that's how my first experience in football began. I didn't play football like competitively until college because in my school there was no football. Then football suddenly exploded, and then my interest also exploded. And then after college, I thought I just had this idea in my head that whatever I may be doing, I just want to stay connected to football and coach, not as a consumer but as a participant. So that's how I planned.
That's very great. I mean, to touch upon the fact that about you being connected to Arsenal, and obviously for football reasons because they were a great side to watch, but also for the sense of, let's say, an ideology, a purpose that's much greater than just simply watching 11 guys take a football on a Saturday or whatever. I mean, that's partly the reason I started watching Liverpool as well. I think they're a fantastic football club, but I think they're much more than just a football club. I think, and I'm probably a biased Liverpool fan, so I'd probably say they are the best football club in that sense because of their connection to the community and how everything's intertwined there. And I wanted to touch upon this later on in the conversation, but if you've talked about it now, I might as well. So, when you approach football as well, so do you have this sense of philosophy that if you are the coach of a football team, that you want to put out, you want your boys to embody, you want, let's say, the supporters to even, let's say, jive in, is the Rajat style of playing, or the Rajat's vision, if that is. Do you have something like that, or do you think it's more pragmatic?
So there is a technical, tactical element which is always there, but there is also a big personal element. And everyone wonders that, I used to wonder that you look at, you go online and search Guardiola tactics, you will get 1 million pages. You go online and search Zidane tactics and see how many pages you get, probably 500,000, because no one writes about that. He's won 3 Champions League and he's won the La Liga right now, but somehow Guardiola will always be greater than Zidane. And this is because we miss the aspect that how important man management is in football. So if you look at someone like Arsene Wenger, who used to get top 4 with teams which weren't that great, and I always used to think that the question is, what's the question? What does he do differently from other managers which helps them achieve this? So is it tactical, or is it technical, or is it what is it? So I heard a story about Arsene Wenger that Robert Perez was not pressing hard enough in training, and Pat Rice went to and shouted at him to Perez, run. So Arsene Wenger said shut up to Pat Rice and say just stay away from Perez, because he understood that if you criticize Perez a little bit, he goes into the shell and he will not ask for the ball, and he won't play. He won't play his natural game. So Wenger's whole philosophy was about making players express themselves, and Guardiola's whole philosophy is making systems which work to solve something. So one is an approach which lies in players being their best creatively and players being self-dependent and producing what they are most capable of and enabling them to do so. Other is taking a group of players and making them understand the system so they can collectively produce something. Both are great ways to do it, and I'm actually influenced by both equally. And eventually, you want to be able to produce systems with average players and also get them get the best out of them. So my philosophy, I'm a big fan of Guardiola. I love systems. I love how he views football, and I love how he understands spaces. So I come from an engineering background, so I immediately understand what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
So I probably read every single technical piece ever written on him, every single YouTube blog on tactics by him, on him, just to understand and get a sense to what he's trying to do. And I feel satisfied. Maybe I'm 51% there, but I still feel satisfied with knowing the things he does and how I can implement them. So I use the same things and try to implement with my 7 set with under 11 kids, and maybe I can try and produce them. I still have to work on my man management side, and because systems and individualism doesn't go well together. For a system to work, everyone has to be efficient. For an individual to work, you have to allow individual to have the freedom of making mistakes. So what's my philosophy is still developing, but I understand football more mathematically, like Guardiola does. And what I want to implement more is the man management style of someone like Arsene Wenger.
No, I'm a big fan of the name you just put out, like Guardiola or Wenger. So another very famous quote that I've heard, and I've talked about this with John McKenzie, who's a Leeds United reporter. So, and obviously he's actually writing a book on Marcelo Bielsa, who's also a big inspiration of mine. And he's talked about that if I'm a head coach of 11 robots, I'll be the best head coach in the whole world. And he looks at football in the ways you put out. It's very methodical. It's almost obsessive. I'm pretty sure you've heard about the famous press conferences he gives about 45 minutes to the journalists. It's more, and when the whole Spygate incident came out, he talked about, you may consider this cheating, but I don't, because it's just an obsessive need of mine to know something that I might have missed on the slightest of chances, even though that would not be possible. So in the sense, I already know everything about a team, even I'm just sending scouts out there regardless. Do you see that? I mean, the point I'm trying to put across is that, do you think that we value some systems over others? So
yes. That's the point I was mentioning about Zidane. So we have to give Zidane the respect that he, of course, I mean, everyone gives Zidane the respect it deserves, but Zidane does not have the cult following that other coaches have. For example, Bielsa. Bielsa is in Leeds United. Zidane has won 3 Champions League and one La Liga. Okay, Bielsa's any top flight.
He's never won
because he. So his ideology is that he wants 11 robots, but you do not have 11 robots. You have 11 human beings.
Yeah.
Who was the coach in Real Madrid before Zidane? His name was from during the.
The Spain head coach.
Lopez? No.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So when he got fired from Lopetegui, I don't remember his name. When he got fired from Real Madrid, Ramos had a comment to make. He said, at this level, a lot of football is about man management as well. So yeah, Bielsa gives you an insight. I've also followed Bielsa a lot, and Bielsa gives you an insight, same insights about how to solve football methodologically. Then you have to be creative on your own and everything. So I like. Obviously, you and I haven't followed Bielsa because next season we will.
That's so exciting.
In Leeds United, but we haven't followed Bielsa as much. So yes, we do tend to give some managers more cult following than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was really I was listening to this podcast and they had this, I think it was the Front Street podcast, and shout out to them. But they were talking about Bielsa and their promotion to the Premier League, and they linked it to how, and I think Leeds United are currently linked by the ownership of Paris Saint-Germain, the QSI group of Paris, and they are interested in buying Leeds United rather. And they talked about the sense of these countries, like let's say the Saudis, or let's say even the ownership group of Abu Dhabi and Qatar and all these places, which may not have, let's say, the best policies towards human rights, and the rest of the world, let's say the Western countries, may look down upon them of how they, let's say, do things over there. But they have this essence of a lot of money, and if they are thinking of, let's say, buying a particular football team which plays aesthetic football, sort of ethically right football, if I have to term it that way, then that will sort of, let's say, put a better image of them towards the wider world. And the media is portraying this as sports washing. Do you have any particular thoughts around that?
You know how football became popular in Mexico?
No idea.
You know Pablo Escobar?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So Pablo Escobar put.
Wait, is it Mexico or Colombia?
No,
Colombia.
yeah, I'm mixing it up. Probably Colombia or Mexico.
Colombia.
But how football became really popular was because he put billions and billions of his drug dollars there. So people get rich, then people use that money to invest in their interest or something else, and eventually it's good for football. Eventually it's good for football because eventually more money is always good for an industry. More money, better salaries. I wish, I don't know how this money will trickle down into grassroots footballs, but more money is good. I don't care how they generated their wealth. I don't care how unethical they were, because if you take up any rich person in the world and you can pinpoint there's something unethical about their businesses. If you take up any company which is more than 100 years old, there'll be something you will find unethical. So it's okay. That's the way the world has always worked, and that's the way the world will always will work.
Yeah.
And wealth is always generated by exploiting someone, and that will never change. I've thought a lot about this, and that will never change. You can do whatever you want, but eventually there will be people who it's a war at every level, and people who win the war will rule the world. So I don't have a problem if they want to take Bielsa at PSG. I don't think Bielsa has the personality to be a big club coach.
That's the he would manage.
PSG. I don't know how PSG can improve their image. The problem with three countries right now, Italy, France and Germany, is that their leagues are not interesting at all. Because it's PSG, Juventus and Bayern Munich. That's what Mourinho said a few weeks back. La Liga and EPL are interesting, others are not interesting. So one aspect of money right now is what it's doing is that competition is there, but not for the first place. There's other competition. But the beauty about football is when you hear about something like Club Atlanta in Italy, and how they've come up and how they're highest scoring club in Italy right now, and how the manager has developed some great new fantastic systems to solve problems. So there's one thing I read somewhere, they may have $100 million, you may have $1 million, eventually it's 11v11. Okay, so you are 11 people and they're 11 people, so if you can do better at what you can do. So there are a lot of issues with money, but I don't think there's point of focusing on something that's out of your and my control, and let's just be like Atlanta and do something which is in our control and get famous.
Even for the football, I was just talking about Atlanta, Alejandro Gomez out exceeding his expected goals. I'm not sure most people are understanding, but let's see. So I've actually thought about this concept as we're talking about right now. So I think it is good that more and more people are investing in football and more money is coming into the sport. That can only be good. But there's also this other thing that I think about is that these teams, these countries are actually investing this money into these football clubs who want it to be very a closed league, something that we have in the IPL or the NBA, it becomes very franchise based. If it's not already happening, if you see Liverpool, Man City, they're probably global clubs and they are local clubs. So do you see that it is almost inevitable that we will move towards, let's say, a European Super League or a World Super League?
Yeah. So I think Wenger spoke about this a couple of years back, and he said it's probably inevitable that they're going to create a weekend, like a midweek weekend European League, and all the domestic matches will be shifted to weekdays. I think the joy in football is of climbing up and going down and being fair to all. Leeds United won Champions League in 2003 and were relegated a couple of years later. Arsenal finished 10th this season. United were
Sheffield United.
And Liverpool won the league after 30 years. So the beauty is in going up and coming down. If you where the things become unfair is where you have a system like IPL. So where the same people playing again against each other, and basically they are the winners. So there is you don't have to face consequences of your action. You're still there, and you will always be there. So I don't like that system, and even if I would like a concept of a European League, that's not a problem. But it still has to be based on qualification on domestic leagues, and that would be fair. And the whole you must have seen the series on Netflix, which relives how FA Cup actually started and how.
Oh, I've seen the titles come up on my Netflix recommend, but I haven't had the time to watch it.
So it's a story similar to Lagan. The first clubs, it was just to beat the Royals, to beat the people a class higher, motivated class of workers. So it's the joy of football is also being an underdog and achieving things when you are an underdog. So I would not like if it becomes IPL.
I totally agree with that. I think, as you said, that this is romantic in me that really likes, as you mentioned, Atlanta, the Leeds United of the world, who wouldn't be possible if we just had, let's say, 10-team league and they're just playing every weekend in some place in Dubai, some place in Paris, I don't know, wherever makes monetary sense for them. I think even La Liga is sort of implemented, I'm not sure if they've already done this, but they're trying to do so with having a couple of games every season in the USA, because they can simply sell out stadiums over there if they have one Barcelona away game there.
That's okay with me. If La Liga or EPL want to play a few matches in India, that'll be good for football. That's okay.
But the thing is, don't you think it's going to be for the detriment of, let's say, playing Elche in India? So that becomes another home game for Barcelona, isn't it? How many Elche fans are there in India, if any? Is what I'm trying to say. Elche is a football club in Spain. It's a very small football club.
Okay.
So the thing I'm trying to say is that if La Liga pushes their games to the USA or India, wherever that makes monetary sense, don't you think it's going to be detrimental to that football to that game? Because they never talked about having the El Clasico in India or having the El Clasico in the USA, because they wouldn't want to take that heritage away from that thing as of yet. Maybe in the future, who knows?
Why don't you think the other way? Let's say Elche comes and defeats Barcelona in India, and what would do that to the club's fortune? And it's India, so 2 billion people will, 1 billion people would automatically know about this club who did this in India. So it can be good also. So I'm not opposed to that idea. I would actually like for some clubs to come and play matches in India.
Right.
But I think only thing that I find it detrimental to is the players, because it's already a very taxing job playing every 3 days a week, and then traveling halfway across the world to play a couple of matches, and to also stay motivated to win it, because it's an actual match, not a friendly, will be tough. So I'm open to the idea. I don't know how they will work, and probably the majority of the clubs eventually veto it because of the same reasons, that they don't want the cycle to be disrupted.
So just coming back towards, we talked a lot about, let's say, this globalization of sport, which is very interesting, and in terms of our role as fans in the world, our role as supporters of football clubs, and how that would impact in the future. But let's just come back to coaching, I guess, because that's an interest of the both of us. So, as you mentioned, you read a lot about Guardiola and Wenger and things like that. Were there other influences, people outside sport that you looked at when you were maybe getting philosophical ideas about how you'd want to be as a coach, how you'd want to be as an individual rather?
Coaching is all these romantic notions aside. Comes down to very basic and simple things, and some of them. And actual coaching is it's not sci-fi. It's simple things. It's simple things. How you receive the ball, how you face when you're receiving the ball. What can you look when you're receiving the ball? The number one, the first thing that you have to improve to make a good player is perception. So you play what you see. If you do not see well, whatever you do, you can't do well. So everything, every position eventually boils down to perception, and then the speed of thought. So perception, speed of thought. So coming back from everything, eventually, and if you see what the managers, what Guardiola is training every day, and what Wenger used to train every day, everything is how can I increase the speed of passing or speed of action of this player by some second. How can I Wenger sponsored the study which used to see how many times a player looks around before he receives the ball, and when you see the results of the study, and you see who the top players come, and you see Xavi, you see Iniesta, and you see Fabregas, and you see all the midfielders who are actually top of the world directly correlate with how many head turns they do, because they're good players because they always know they have a Tesla car scanner in their head, and they already know what's happening around them, so their decisions are much better. They're seeing things which other players are not. So comes down to perception. And with kids also, how fast can you improve? How can you, first of all, how can you improve their perception? How can you improve their speed of thought? And how can you give them ideas of finding a solution to a problem? You can stand there and give an option. You can move in there. You can give a forward option. You can give a back option. You can make runs into the box. There are a lot of attacking actions you can do. So Guardiola is a positional base. So a lot of positions are, but look at the way he's evolved. Now it's a lot of moving around, a lot of mixing, a lot of swapping. Wenger was always freedom in everywhere. So, but you have to find your own solution, and so coaching comes down to perception. For me, perception, speed of thought. This is individual development, and then comes systems. And over this, a layer of man management, and that's how we go into it. So I want to create players who can think a split second faster than the opposition, and that split second faster gives you a split second key pass, a through ball, over the top ball, a quick 1-2, a run into the box, but just a split second faster. So if you are faster in thought, then we can beat them. So and of course, one level I forgot, the most important, the physical level. So yeah.
Just to touch on, let's say, the example with Guardiola. So, because I'm a big Klopp fan, and probably, I don't know, just I'm a really big Klopp fan. So there was this game in the Bundesliga when Klopp and Guardiola were both in the Bundesliga, when Dortmund used to play Bayern. Obviously, in the rest of the games, Bayern that season, as you mentioned, they used to be very positional based, and juego de posiciones is the Spanish term for that, is of having this freedom until and unless, being very methodical until the final third, and the final third being very, as you said, very much Wenger. It's very much like freedom, as Henry even mentioned that when he was playing for Guardiola, he said that there's a famous quote, I will teach you how to get the ball from defense to the final third, and from the final third it's your job to score the goal, basically. But then I really found this interesting that when he played Klopp, because Klopp is almost an kryptonite to his system in that sense, because as you mentioned, even though you have this look and pass and all this scanning, that even if however much you train them to say that you become almost irresistible to press. But Klopp has a totally different philosophy. He says that it doesn't matter how good a player you are, how good on the ball you are. If you are put under pressure, every individual in the world will succumb to, let's say, a fault. And what he did in that game was that he asked Javi Martinez to play centre forward, and he basically lofted the ball to him all game long and buying 1-2 or something like that. He basically changed his approach from being Guardiola-esque to Sam Allardyce for just one game to beat one opponent. Do you think that is better to say because it will get you results, or do you think that no matter, even if they would have lost the game 4-0?
I think you understand the Klopp system pretty well, and I think that's his philosophy, and he's done his. First of all, no one can dislike Klopp. He's a very, very likable person, and he gives out he's rarely negative. He gives out very positive emotions to opposition, even to his players, fans. He's got a sense of uniting people. So it's not. He has a system where he believes that no creative midfielder can create as many chances as a pressing system.
The system is the most creative thing. It's better than a number 10.
Yes. So he bought players to fulfill that criteria. He bought fast wingers, fast strikers who could quickly attack the space when they create their pressing traps. So he has a style of play which is also very interesting, and the good thing about this style of play is that it's teachable. Again, you need if you have Giroud on top, probably Giroud is doing fantastically well for Chelsea and he did fantastically well for France to win the World Cup, but you need to know what you believe in and how you play, and I don't think that his philosophy is in any way bad or good. I've also learned to appreciate low blocks and parking the bus. Because eventually what you're trying to do is you're trying to invite pressure from the opposite team to create space behind and to quickly execute a counter attack on very fast speeds. It's not easy to coach. It's not easy to defend. It's not easy to constantly defend. It takes a lot of concentration, and you get few chances. You have to execute them perfectly. So any manager who has any system and who believes in his system and does it well is good. So, but you have your own individual preferences how you want to play. So I would rather play more. Obviously, pressing would be a part of thing, but mainly my gameplay would just be revolved around pressing. So that's individual choice of what type of football appeals to you, and that's okay.
So the question I tried to put forward here was that obviously everyone has this preference of the way they want to play or the way they want their teams to play. But the example I wanted to put forward here was that, so when we look at, let's say, you talked about low blocks, and I think there's no one better when it comes to low blocks than, let's say, Simeone or let's say Sean Dyche. And Sean Dyche talked about this, that the only reason I'm playing this sort of football that you may perceive to be negative is that because I have Burnley and because I have these sorts of players, it's not feasible for me to play juego de posiciones with these players, because it's almost impossible for me to do that. Where on the contrary, you can look at, let's say, someone like Maurizio Sarri, who says that why can't you do that? I've done this in the lower leagues of Italy with the worst of players. So the point I'm trying to put forward here is that it doesn't matter who the opponent is, however much better he is, until and unless if you have 38 games to train with your players and you want to see a playing style put forward to them, it doesn't matter who you're playing. If they know the system, if they know what you're trying to put forward, then you can play that, and you don't have to succumb to, let's say, a low block or a middle block.
Yes. I think eventually the managers who do well are who have one system and believe in the system and adapt that system according to the opposition, rather than completely changing their style of play for each game. So you're right. A manager could play expansive football using whatever the players they have, and they will do probably equally well, if not better, by changing their game style every other game. So if you look at whatever may happen, Mourinho will never give you space at the back. If it's a big game, small game, any game, he won't give you. He will always have 5-6 players behind the ball, so he will never give you space to counter attack easily. Whatever may happen, Guardiola will play with the ball. You won't ever see a Guardiola team playing a low block. Whatever may happen, you won't see a Wenger team playing a low block. Whatever may happen, you won't see a Klopp team not pressing. I respect managers who stick to their style of play and try to adapt their style of play, not their entire game model according to the opposition.
That's a very interesting point to touch upon. I think we were talking about it just before the podcast we started recording. So our common friend Dipankar, who's coached in Mexico, and then he sent me this very interesting article on Stuart Webber, who's the sport director at Norwich Football Club, and I've been following his journey for a while now. And Norwich have gone down, and I'd say that in the right way to go down in my eyes, because Stuart Webber talked about this when he had the first interview. He said that we believe in the system, we believe in these players, we believe in this manager, and this is how we're going to play for the whole of the season, for 38 games. It doesn't matter if we lose 7-0 every week, if we win 3-0, 4-0 every week. This is the way we're going to try to put forward. We aren't going to...
But I think that borders line on stupidity, because your beliefs are not, like, they're not worth anything if you do not produce the results.
Okay.
So if it's not working after 10 games,
right,
you have to question yourself.
Right.
I may be doing something really stupid. Right. For example, pushing 10 players in the other half, and I can't go around saying whatever may happen, I'll just play like this.
Yeah.
It also has to make some sense. For example, if they're being relegated and he's sticking to a system, I think there's some flaw there, because it's like there is no martyrdom in or glory in following the system, and if you're failing, okay, it has to produce results. If you believe in it, then it has to also produce results. Okay, so all this only works for managers who are doing well.
I generally believe on the contrary, because I felt that Norwich were unbelievable last year in the Championship. I think this might happen with Leeds United next season as well. So last season when Sheffield United and Aston Villa and Norwich came over the Premier League, I said this to my friends as well in the start of the season. Even though Norwich plays much better football in the Championship, and they would have beaten Sheffield United most times in the Championship, the style of football that Chris Wilder and Sheffield United put forward is more suitable to the Premier League, and they will, in my eyes, stay much longer than
Right. But you look at managers who adapted. What is the formation of Invincibles? 4-4-2. Next year, 4-4-2. We finished 4th. Next year, 4-2-3-1. Okay, just to changing. You have the same style of play.
Exactly. But your underlying style of play is the same, isn't it?
Yes. But you are also adapting to what's going on. You understand that you cannot. Why did a 4-4-2 change to a 4-2-3-1? Because with the evolution of Mourinho and Rafa Benitez, a lot of teams are playing low blocks.
Yeah.
If you do not have 3 lines, you cannot penetrate them. You need some players in between the lines always. So 4-2-3-1 gives you 3 players between the lines and 1 striker, 2 on the flanks and 2 behind the line. So you can penetrate those. So you can have the same style of play, but you also have to adapt to where you're playing. So in Championship, maybe everyone plays high line and you can play, do a lot of things. But when you come here, you have to analyze and see and change. Because if you do, how many times Guardiola has changed his systems? From Barcelona to Bayern to Manchester City. Barcelona was Messi based. Bayern Munich was more winger based. Robin with crosses.
Yeah.
City is more half spaces and low crosses and cutbacks based. So he has the same style of play, but he adapts
with the players
he has, and also with the challenges he has.
Yeah.
Because he cannot transport the same system back to everywhere.
Do you think that it comes a point with Norwich that they have to understand that the quality of players that other teams have is just too great for them at the moment? So it may take some time, that even though they are playing a similar style of play, maybe a different formation, maybe a different set of players, newer players, whatever it may be, they just have to understand that it has to be 3 years, 4 years until they can establish a sort of...
I actually do not believe in long-term projects. not very long term projects. Like there have to be some green shoots always. A manager should be able to show in a month that there is some change and
Right.
some clear green shoots available.
Right.
So if it takes you to be relegated to show you your system, then it's probably not worth it. Probably something else is worth it.
Sorry to cut you off, but do you think that, let's say, Klopp finished 8th in his first season, Guardiola got like 4th or something in his first season, Sarri was, I don't know how he performed in his first season, but I understand that point. There were let's say glimpses of the Klopp system in Klopp's half season.
Yes.
Guardiola's glimpses of what
Yes.
he wanted to put forward, Sarri's thing. But Klopp said in his first press conference as well, I will only be successful if you give me the time. And that may
Yes. But we had Unai Emery and no one wanted to watch Arsenal.
I don't
because
think Unai is a good signing anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but the point was, you can see that you could see that what Klopp is trying to do. You could see what Guardiola was trying to do. So if you eventually don't see that,
Exactly, yeah.
then you have to change.
So the point I'm trying to make is, I see that with Norwich though. I don't know how you may, maybe if you haven't watched Norwich.
You see that.
I see like a trend. I see a positivity there. I see how well they sort of trying what they're trying to do. I see very much similarities to Brentford in the money ball approach.
Okay. Probably haven't watched Norwich enough, so maybe this conversation will go anywhere. So, but maybe I will have a look and get back to you.
No, I think he's a really interesting man. I think Daniel Farke has done like a really good job. And the sporting director I was talking about, Stuart Webber, he was previously at Huddersfield with Daniel Wagner. And I think you know about what Huddersfield did in the first time in the Premier League and the interesting sorts of pressing trap. I mean, it's probably me only being, I don't know, obsessive about Germans and with beards and things, but
Okay.
but yeah. Where was I going with this? Right, so we were talking about your podcast you did with this Nepali radio channel, and one thing that really struck me in that conversation you had with that person was that you talked about Arsene Wenger being this sort of inspiration of yours, and you talked about him having this emotional intelligence and this intelligence that's not only relevant to football, but he was the one who brought in nutrition, sports science, and several of these other factors that you can call him a visionary in that sense. But what did you mean by emotional intelligence in that thing? Because I think many people wouldn't understand what emotional intelligence is.
So there are a lot of players who right now want to sign for Arsenal. So William Saliba signed for Arsenal. He said because Arsenal is Arsenal. Thomas Partey is a lifelong Arsenal fan, and they all became fans of Arsenal due to just one man. Wenger had this quality of inspiring people and taking people along. So to be at a helm of a club from 2005 to 2017, when you were not doing well in the league and still being able to have the majority support you, is a huge achievement. If you look at his press conferences, if you look at the way he talks to players, the way he talks about players, he's a man who, for example, if you think that if I have to do something, how would I want to do it? So that is the only person. That's the one person who comes to mind. This is the way to do it. This is the way to talk to about this thing. This is the way to never any negative comments about managers in public. Never any washing your dirt outside in the public. Winning, coming back from defeats. If you look at Arsene Wenger's record of recovering from setbacks, it's huge. As in, if you would look a statistic of if you lose a game, what is the probability that you will lose the next game? And if you look at and compare the statistics of Arsene Wenger's statistics, he does very, very well. So he has the ability to get the group up again and make them focus on something bigger than themselves. So see, what was the idea of Invincibles? Everyone wins a league. I want to do it in a way that no one else has done it. So you inspire. That's what politicians also do. you try to inspire them to something, a vision which is much higher and much greater than yourself. So for the stadium, whole Arsenal fan base went behind that project because we wanted to do things our way. That we want to have our own money, we want to have our own club, and we want to do the things right way. We will have our own revenue, even though we weren't getting results. We were just taking people together and showing them a vision which is just greater than the next game. So right now, I don't see any manager except for Klopp who's able to do that. Take people along with themselves. And football is also about a sense of unity. When you go into the stadium, you should be all together instead of just.
It is that tribal cult mentality that you were talking about. It is that you want to be associated to a greater cause.
Yes. But now with what's happening is that clubs have become fractured. In every club, there are 3 clubs. One which wants the manager out, one which absolutely supports the manager, and one which doesn't care too much. So the club should have the power to attract people to itself, and that's the only way to connect. Why am I watching some club in UK? I'm staying here in Gurgaon. There is no reason except for it somehow appeals to some of my values, or maybe. So yeah, Arsenal Wenger probably appeal to some of my values.
No, I think Wenger's a really interesting character to unpick, and I mean, if you want to, we can do that here. So something I really wanted to ask, and I've asked this to other Arsenal fans as well, is that later down in his career, so he was very picky, and I think that's very similar to Klopp as well. Like, he only wanted the right player, and if he had to make a transfer, that is. If only he found that there was a right player in the market, would he bring him in? I think Arsenal fans were complaining when Coquelin was playing in defensive midfield that is there really not another defensive midfielder who we can get that's not better than Coquelin, or who's not better than this person or that person? So can you talk about this obsessive nature that him wanting the right person for the job, right player in, that's the only way he'd spend money, otherwise he's happy to work with the resources he's got?
Look, he didn't play Football Manager, so how many, look at the players Arsenal bought in the past 2-3 years and look at the amount they've spent for the quality they've got. So what he actually, these 2-3 years proved that what he was doing was actually better, because you never know the other side. You can suddenly spend 200 million. How many? United has unlimited money, so they can keep doing it again and again and again. Not all clubs have unlimited money. So Arsenal, unfortunately, Arsenal owner isn't one to put that much money into the club. If you have unlimited money, you can do that again. United have had so many flops since Ferguson, but they keep buying again. It doesn't matter. They have the money, so you can keep doing that. So fans just we also like something new. The idea of new appeals to us. So this is not good. I've heard about that. Maybe he comes in and he will do better. And that's the same with manager. No, Mourinho is not good. Let's get the entire. So it's always about new. We want something novel, and that's also part of our culture due to increasingly on-demand everything. And we want players on demand. We want managers on demand. We want changes on demand. But it takes time to also improve players. If social media would have been there when Dennis Bergkamp joined Arsenal, probably in a couple of years he would have probably left Arsenal, because first 2-3 years were average. They weren't great, they weren't bad, but they weren't exceptional. So he would have probably been memed and bullied out of the club already. It's actually become even more difficult for the players, I think, at the moment, because they go online and they read, and when you read, it's 50% is negative. Even if you score 5 goals, someone will say you're not Messi. Even if you're Cristiano Ronaldo, they'll say you're not Messi. If you're Messi, they'll say you're not Cristiano Ronaldo. If you say both, they'll say you're not Pele. You haven't won the World Cup. So it's just that, because social media has done one thing, it's made easy for anyone to win. You can go and comment on anything without knowing anything about it, and you can just feel an immediate boost that I'm a winner. Okay, you can just go to Trump's handle and say you're an idiot, and you feel like you vindicated, you can go to do whatever. So that is what is also happening with football, and players read that. So it's bad for players also. It's very difficult to concentrate where 50. So Zaka had a lot of abuse this season from Arsenal fans. He lost his captaincy because he lost his school. Because ultimately they're also humans, and eventually it's probably good for players to shut off their social media or at least disable the comments so they do not get that feedback. They do not read the reports in the papers for their own emotional health. I don't know where we started.
So you're talking about Wenger and his approach to transfers, but let's just touch upon that. So I think that is very true. I think that is the sense of, and I think I just read something a week back, 2 weeks back, that Arsenal the last 5 years, 6 years, they've been in the top 5, top 6 clubs in the Premier League. The fewest contributions from, let's say, an ownership, if any, towards the club. Adding additional money, it's always being self-sufficient in the way they have to function. So I think that is definitely there. But I think, as you mentioned, there's also this sense of so Klopp put this famous quote out. He said that, so a reporter asked him that, oh, you won the Premier League, you won the Champions League, are you going to make any additions in the summer? He said that it's been very rare for me in my career to have my group of players with me. He said that Liverpool are a club big enough now that I can afford to say no to players, no to people who are coming in with offers. It was very difficult for me for when I was at Mainz or Dortmund. If a club came in with a check on it, on a financial reason, it's obviously it's viable because how can a club like that survive? So he said that the enjoyable part for him is to keep this group together and then maybe build on it as you go. So I think that's also there, that it's not easy to coach players and it takes time, as you mentioned. So
yes, only thing I think probably in that era, if you would have won a couple of trophies, that would have done a lot better too, because eventually to attract money, attract players, you also have to keep winning. If you do not win, eventually things will go away. So whatever your philosophy will be, whatever your idealism will be, you have to win. And this is one thing that went wrong in that Arsene Wenger era, because it went too long without winning. And when you go too long without winning, you cannot hold on to players. Liverpool won the Champions League, won the Premier League. Why would anyone want to leave there? It's got great support base. Why would you want to leave there? If you're in Real Madrid, why do you want to leave there? But if you're in Manchester United right now, probably Arsenal right now, or Tottenham right now, you may have your sides up. So you have to win to keep players together.
So there's this development psychologist named John Piaget, and he's talked about, and I think I've talked about this several times on the podcast, and he looks at, let's say, playing, let's say, be it sports, in a certain way, and that's the only way you can play. And it's the way we were talking about, the ethical way we may consider to play. It's having the ball, it's trying to go to the offensive and try to create chances. And he thinks that is because he thinks that sports is a miniature form of life in that sense. And if you don't abide by, let's say, encouraging your child, as you're a youth coach, maybe saying that, that's great that you put your, let's say, you try to do a maneuver, you try to dribble past the defender, but you weren't successful, maybe next time you will be better in doing that. That's a better way to look at things than say that, oh, the referee was wrong and you were just mugged off or something like that. Because if you say the second thing, that the referee was bad or he didn't have the best of games, that may maybe aid you towards a result on a particular day. But if you say that, oh, maybe you can improve on dribbling, and then that's something which will eventually lead you towards a better path in your career, as a player, as an individual. So he said that is beneficial in winning league titles, in the sense that winning more and more of these games, a series of games, and as a result, more and more people will come to watch you, come to admire you. That's why we like personalities like Bielsa, like Klopp, like Guardiola, who bring the sense of, let's say, doing it the right way, doing it with one sort of vision in mind. And that's why, as you said, people want to be associated with them. That's why they win league titles. That's why they do so well in life. Because Look,
Mourinho scored over 100 goals with Real Madrid, 100 points with Real Madrid by playing a counter-attacking style, and they defended deep. Okay, so if you do whatever, the thing that attracts people is winners. Okay, no one's supporting Watford, or you have to win to attract people, and people develop their own ideas why this is good post the fact that you won. okay, people will justify winners in the way they want. I don't. The thing from just for youth football, I think it's more enjoyable to play with the ball and not force them to defend that much. So from the youth football perspective, I agree with that. That players like to play with the ball. Players enjoy having the ball, and it's also good for the development to have the ball. Coming to the post-match, the comment about post-match comments you made, a lot of that is done to deflect attention from your team. So maybe there is a thing that you say something in public and go back and say something in private. So you create a huge drama in the public. For example, Mourinho, he has this very simple tactic to go and say something outrageous, so the entire attention comes on him, and then he can go and talk to his players without they being affected about anything. So there are a lot of tactics to play this meta game with the press, with the everything. But I think all game styles, if you're winning, you will attract people. Real Madrid was actually, if you watch the compilation of Mourinho era, it was
great to watch.
They were great to watch. The counter-attacking football style was great to watch. Sometimes you would find Guardiola football boring to watch.
But how?
Yeah, pretty boring. So, what's entertaining about football? Goals,
quick,
fast goals,
yeah.
quick movement, goals.
Yeah.
If you score a fast counter-attacking goal, that's very attractive.
Yeah.
And goals in general are very attractive.
Yeah.
And quick combination play is very attractive. If you have to define attractive football, you could just make 2-3 things: high goals, counter-attacks, quick combination plays, some exceptional headers, or some through balls, So attractive football is a very vague sort of a concept.
It's something we put a label.
We put the label on. So I don't think there's a ethical way in football. There's nothing unethical in football because you're playing in a framework of rules. So if you win, and if you win consistently, that's perfect. That's perfect. And so winners will attract people.
So you work in youth football, and I've coached youth football for a bit as well. So I wanted to get your handle on what do you think about. There are some countries, I'm not sure about India because I haven't coached here enough and I haven't coached in tournaments as such, that they don't keep scores in certain age groups. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's just everyone's become too soft these days in the world, and you can see it. Everyone's also becoming, like, you see this in politics also, everyone becomes too offended too easily, and you don't want any slightest hint of pain. I can't say that you're bad, I can't say you can't take properly, I can't criticize you. We want to make some nicely soft fur balls of our players, and I think it's okay to lose, I think it's okay to get criticized once in a while, I think it's okay to get hurt. I think if you're going for matches, you have to keep scores. Otherwise, what's the point? Sport is competition. You come here to win or lose. What was winning and losing 300 years back? War. You die or you stay alive. We've just created sport so we can actually feel those moments of heroism without killing ourselves. That is what sport is, and we channelize our inner energies.
I totally agree with you. I think that, as I mentioned earlier on in the chat, that we as society, when we are moving away from the old-fashioned dogmas or let's say religion and these sorts of things, we focus too much on petty things that maybe, as you mentioned, let's say not keeping scores because people don't like losing, it may not be the best way to look at things, but that kind of puts forward that whole argument that Jean Piaget was putting forward, that if we don't teach people how to lose, then they won't grow as individuals.
Yes.
I think most of the footballers we talked about, I think the Rio Ferdinands of this world, the Vidiches of the world, how are they so good footballers? It's because they have gone through these struggles. I mean, Roberto Firmino plays for Liverpool. He talks about playing on the streets of Brazil, which are concrete streets, and he's now playing on turf grasses.
And now, this generation, we have the nicest, most bunch of footballers, and so it's a very different phase. We've also have got the nicest bunch of youth at the moment who have grown up in the most comfortable environment ever in the history of the world. Ever in the history of the world. So we don't know if if a real something
Ah.
stress strikes us, how we will react. I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't know what will happen, but that'll be interesting to see.
No, for sure, for sure. So, let's say let's talk about something. Another thing I picked up from that interview that you gave, the one I was previously mentioning, was that football isn't the only thing you do. Like the youth coach part is sort of part time, the sort of work you do, and there's stock market trading. There's other investing sort of things that you are also doing on the side.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, let's say, tackling two jobs at a time? Because I've talked to several other youth coaches on this podcast, and they have mentioned that often the job of a youth coach is often bigger than a job of a head coach in the ways that they have to look at, let's say, talking to the parents, arranging transport for competitions, getting hotels booked, doing this, doing that, which may not be in the books of, let's say, a head coach of a club that has these many people who are looking into it, and the pay is very low in youth for youth coaches, and the fact that they're working part time. So can you touch upon your experience there?
Yeah, same. So you worked as youth coach in UK. How much did you get paid?
I think it was like it's better than India. It's much better than India. But it's like £10 a session, something.
Session. So if you take 30 sessions a month, that's £300.
Yeah.
Imagine being 30-year-old and having a family and living on £300 a month. This realization came to me actually much later. When I started coaching in football, I went all in without thinking about the economic consequences and everything. But eventually you realize that being a football coach is as difficult as being a football player, because the chances are same, one in huge. So you're
more difficult.
often probably more difficult. Yes. Chances are very, very slim. You need the universe to be perfectly aligned for everything to happen perfectly for you to get the chance and you to do something well. So if you cannot, I cannot, maybe other people can. I cannot put all the baskets in, all the eggs in that basket for sure, because I have to live, I have to support myself, I have a family, and I want to have a decent lifestyle. And for that, I need to have a day job. I need to have a job which pays me money. And youth football does take a lot of work. So basically, I was working 7 days a week, because I had sessions Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays, and Sunday was match day, and my 5 days were working. So I worked 7 days a week, and Sunday almost matches. Like Sunday, the only off time I used to get was Sunday afternoon, late afternoon.
Okay.
So entire week that was the only off time I used to get. And so managing the first job and making sessions and doing this, it does take time, but I enjoy it. I did really enjoy it. The idea of having a match on the weekend excites me. Idea of coaching kids and improving them and seeing how they perform in the weekend excites me. There are not many jobs in the world which will allow you to do that. So I'm lucky to be in a job which allows me to do that. Lucky to have. So I'm working on my own, so it gives me some freedom to do that. But it's been a tough ride. It's not been easy to get that. But I decided that I will go this way to do this. So that's where I'm right now, and I just hope I can continue this for as long as I can, and hope. So there are two types of bets in life you take. One bet is to keep things normal, sane, and you do not fail somewhere you do not fail. And then you can take very risky bets that you may succeed, like a bet which has low probability and some bets which are high probability. So my day job is my high probability bet, where I will probably always be a little bit secure, and with that comfort I can take the other bet of low probability.
That's odd to say, because generally people, when they talk about investing, they wouldn't consider that, let's say, as that to be their safe bet. Because they'd say that, okay, I work 9 to 5, and then on maybe, let's say, when I'm back home, I look at some of the markets, so I can invest maybe during the day.
So I'm not an investor. What I do is I trade systems. So I take data, I backtest some patterns, and I trade those patterns. So the backtest gives me a reasonable idea how much money I'm going to make on the return on the capital I'm going to make, and if it doesn't work, then I test something else and I add in. So it gives me some idea. So it gives me some sense of control on how much return I'm going to get. Investing is, as you said, a little bit low probability. Right? So mine is more of generating cash flow through high turnover of strategies.
So I've faced this. So first of all, I think I want to share this as well. Like when I was coaching, I think I've done a couple of sessions when you as an oversight for BBFS, but I think there's a real sense of satisfaction. I feel even though I've just coached nothing as much as compared to you and several other coaches I've talked to, is that I'm always thinking about my team and I'm always thinking about my training session. It doesn't matter if I'm going to school, if I'm going to university. I'm always trying to think about, so like being fans of these great managers in the Premier League and in world football, I'm thinking, can I do something like that in my team? And is there, let's say, a path like that? So there is always a sense as a youth coach or whatever level that you are coaching in, that you are constantly thinking about your team, and that sort of, for me, it became, let's say, to some extent, let's say, over-consuming, because I don't know how to explain. Have you felt something like that?
I think 24/7. If we've lost a match on the weekend, then yes, all the thoughts will be there, and you come up with new ideas, new systems. Eventually, but that's good. That's good because you think of all possibilities, all ways you can improve, and all the negative experience in early ages of coaching are giving you new ideas to how to overcome that. And I think if you do not have that, it's very difficult to become a coach. Because if you are not obsessed with your team, then I don't know. Then it becomes a job more than the way we want to do it.
So I think again, citing that interview, because I think I picked up a lot of stuff from that. So you talked about Brendan Rodgers, who's currently Leicester manager, and he talked about him working several couple jobs when he was in his coaching journey, and he talked about if there isn't this deep passion for the sport, passion for the game, passion for coaching even, that you will not make it this far, because it's only the people who are so junky, who are so obsessive about the game do make it there. So you can look at Maurizio Sarri, who quit his lucrative job in, let's say, banking to just become a football coach. I mean, how many people would do that? So
that's true. If you're not obsessed enough, because there are also lots of steps. You have to get all the licenses. It's not easy. I mean, to get to a decent place where you will be eligible for decent jobs, it's a 10-year process. So to stay in a 10-year process in a low-paying environment and being constantly motivated is not for everyone. Most people like watching football, but coaching football is not that easy. Also, what I see is everyone comes with one idea and just tries to. What happens is you go with some vision and you see that reality is completely different. You have to probably learn this and learn that and learn that. And the learning process, football seems very easy, but football coaching, the learning process is pretty big. It's not small. It's a long process. So yes, you have to be motivated, and just like any other career, if you have to reach to the top, you cannot do without.
Something I wanted to ask is that I think I'm pretty fortunate in that, like, my parents have been very supportive of me pursuing passions in coaching, pursuing passions in working in football in the long term. Did you ever face, let's say, a pushback from relatives, family, to say that you just graduated from IIT, one of the most, if not the best institution in India? Why don't you just say take a 9-to-5 job in an IT industry and something along those lines?
My mom has never ever asked me about my job or what I do. She only thinks she asks is have I eaten enough or my dad is luckily he doesn't pressurize me on anything, and also I'm making I always keep making an effort to convince them, and I'm always also aware of where I am, that my other career is there. So I'm also putting enough effort enough motivation in my other career as well, so that I have this there, so I can pursue this. Because if this doesn't exist, then I personally would not be able to do this, regardless of what parents think. And because it's if there is no money,
of course,
there is no like money comes first, and like your survival comes first, and other things comes later.
Yeah.
So luckily from my parents, no. I don't head to anyone else. So
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. So you've had the time to go to Barcelona and learn the Spanish way, the Spanish culture of coaching, and how they look at football, and not only Spain, I'd say, because so the school you attended was MBP, and forget me, I don't understand. I'm not able to pronounce the whole full form because I think it's in Spanish. But there are coaches who come from several parts of the world, people from Mexico, some other parts of South America, and other places as well. Can you talk about your journey there, your experience there?
So I went there to first of all understand that what's the difference in knowledge that I lack just sitting from here.
Yeah.
And no, excuse me, interacting with other coaches and see where am I in level to those.
Yeah.
So MVP full form is actually pretty simple: making better players.
Alright,
and making better professionals. So MVP is a great organization, and they have these. They have their own methodology of how to view football. Okay, so I did learn a lot from that methodology. But there were two key realizations for me by going there. Is that the difference in level of coaches from here to there? What I felt was. It's no disrespect to other coaches I work with. We're similar. Like we do not have to feel in any way that we inferior, that we lack something, because I understood what they understood. They understood what I understood, and we could discuss the same things. So it boils down to how much experience you have, how much you've worked on ground, and how much. So it may be India or Spain. So that gives you a sense of confidence. It's same all over the world.
Yeah.
He's a 25-year-old person. I'm a 28-year-old person. We both work 5-7 years. So if I work hard enough, then I should do probably better than him, because. This was one aspect. Spanish way. There is no Spanish way. It's a myth.
Okay.
It's a myth. There is no Spanish way as such. Only thing that you see in youth Spain is they play a lot with ball. But when you go and see second division matches and third division matches, a lot of team play the same way you see Norwich and Watford playing.
Yeah.
Not all Spanish coaches. What we think is, if you go to Spain and everyone is juego de posición, it's not like that. And I was couple of matches I went to see for third division, fourth division, I was pretty disappointed, because I was expecting something completely. Yeah. But
maybe starting a
if you playing out of the back is not that easy as well. Unai Emery tried 1.5 years with Arsenal and he couldn't get them to play out of the back that easily, because all these modern football requires understanding of systems, and you require a little bit of engineering mind. So people like Guardiola, people like Klopp, they understand systems very well, and they can implement such things with systems. So if there is a 30-year-old coach there, maybe he doesn't understand systems as well, and maybe you do systems much better. So if the difference in Spain and India is number of fields and number of players who are coming in, that's it. If you build 100 fields in Haryana, and if you have every weekend you have matches, and if you spring 100 clubs, in 20 years time will be there. I have no doubts about it. In 20 years time we'll be there. It's just that we do not have. They have a match every single weekend. So they have leagues, like they have. We have I-League. We have second division, and that's it. Finish.
Yeah.
Finish. They have first, they have at least 15, 16, 18 divisions. So you have amateur leagues. So you have a match every weekend, no matter what level you play in. So that is the main issue. We do not have enough stadiums, we do not have enough matches, and we do not have enough people who are getting into football at a very youth level. That's it. If one state in India takes a mission to build 100 pitches, artificial pitches, and gives them to various clubs and starts a league and make them flooded so we can coach at night. One good thing in Spain is a lot of coaching takes place after 7 p.m. So people can come back from work, go to coaching, and then do that.
Right.
If the coaching starts at 5 o'clock, a lot of people are out of job anyways. So there are little hacks in system, but I think India problem is too huge. How big is Spain? Spain is as big as
a state or something.
a state.
You can not even that.
Yeah, it's like compared to the population, how Spain is not that big, and so one state in India needs to take a lead. Maybe we need a football coach as a chief minister, football fanatic as a chief minister who takes it and makes it a mission to make that state the best. Because current structure of football is very fragmented. The advantage about England and Spain is, why does a club structure work very well in a small country? You can take a bus and go play Liverpool. You can take a bus and go to there. You can't take a bus and go to Goa. You can't take a bus and go. It's the same problem in America.
Yeah.
It's the exact same problem in America. So India can have a very, very vibrant structure if every state becomes like a European country. And then you have Indian Champions League in India. So every state has their own separate league, own separate divisions. Then you will have employment opportunities. Then you will have everything. But I can't do that sitting here.
Of course.
The only thing I can do is coach my youth team there. But you need someone in the head to implement this.
I think I feel really strongly about this. I think that once we move away from having politicians as in charge of sporting organizations in India, be it, I think the BCCI, to whatever faults they've done in the past, they've done a great step in getting Saurabh Ganguly as the head person. I think I really admire the work he does as a cricketer and even as an individual. I think more and more sporting organizations in India can take steps like that. But I think there's a very similar model maybe we can implement from Brazil. And I understand Brazil is relatively popular, but not in terms of, let's say, in capacity to India. But what the system they have there is that they have these state leagues that happen in every state, and then the winner of those state leagues is then promoted to the second division and then the national division over there. I think we can take a very similar approach here because, I don't know, Mizoram is pretty different to West Bengal is pretty different to
Exactly. But for that we need stadiums, and we need to have a mission to build at least 5,000 stadiums in India. 5,000 artificial pitches or 10,000 artificial pitches in India, a one-time big investment. And that will set football for 100 years in India.
Something I found really interesting was working for this sports management company in Delhi. I don't know if you've heard about them. So they're called World One Sports, and they do this project in. They've taken it in two places currently. So they are in Champai, which is in Meghalaya, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And Vishnupur in Manipur, and they have these. They're calling it, I think, they're India's first baby league, and there have been several baby leagues that have come about after that. And what they do is they have seasons of what is there in Uruguay and what is there in Argentina, where kids, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, play every weekend for how a Premier League season would turn out. So they're playing these amount of games every single season, and these kids are being picked up by your Bengaluru FCs, your biggest clubs in India, who are coming, I don't know, taking like 14-hour bus rides to come to just to see these kids coming out of Champai. And when Manchester United kids came to play in Mumbai, most of them were represented by these batches.
Eventually the model has to be sustainable. It's not feasible for kids to go away from their families at very young ages. And you need clubs nearby, you need travel nearby, and you need opportunities nearby. And they can take that decision once they're 15, 16. Let's say you have a Reliance Foundation, okay? They take a lot of kids all over the country. Suddenly they are 16 years old now. What do they do now? What opportunities do they have? Which division do they play in? We do not have divisions to take the inflow. So we have organizations trying to do everything. Baby leagues are a very good concept. I like that. But we have organizations trying to do a lot of things solo, and there hasn't been a structure which has been thought of where everything integrates. Okay, we have baby leagues, so if there's a baby league in Delhi, from that we have a junior youth league, then a senior youth league, then some third division, second division, first division, and from that a national division. So any player can see his pathway.
Yeah.
A lot of parents come and ask me, so sir, what will he do after 2 years? I don't know. I don't know what he can do after 2 years. We can play I League. Maybe if he's good enough, he can play I League for Baichung Pune football schools. I don't know what he can do after 2 years.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you. I don't have any answers for that. So someone has to sit in top and make a philosophy of the structure, and that structure has to be there for 100 years. But eventually, it requires investment. I don't think AIFF has enough money to invest, and I think that investment has to come from private sector, and
Which is for the most part coming.
which is coming, but it has to come from a football fanatic. We need a India's Pablo Escobar to.
I mean, some would say that's Reliance, but okay.
So
Mukesh Ambani just signed his 4th IPL trophy, 5th IPL trophy in September, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, I don't think the national press can put this out, but yeah, so this is internet and I can put out thoughts like this.
yeah, we can. I'm pretty sure he does not give any fucks about us when he's getting.
Yeah.
He just raised over $1 billion. No, not $1 billion. More than $1 billion. Over $10 billion. So two boys over the internet.
Yeah. I mean, that's how the Joe Rogan podcast started, and then US presidents wanted to come on there, so who knows? So just bringing it back to spending time in Spain. So something I think I shared this as well. So when I go onto the coaching field, so I get really passionate, and I think that, oh, okay, so this head coach can do something like that. Why can't I implement it on the field? And you mentioned that the reality is totally different. So even if you may think that, oh, that's the perfect way to play because Guardiola plays it and that's how City play, so even my kids should play that, right? But when you go there and do that on the field, it's practically impossible because maybe you have to start on the basics, or maybe they haven't had the experience that Spanish kids have had because they've been playing sport from a much younger age.
It's a very. I'll ask you a question. You have to play Guardiola. You want to play the Klopp way. Okay, so how do you structure it? What's the first session you would take? I mean, just think about it. It was the first. You maybe let's say you start 7v7 and you have to play Guardiola way, like Klopp way. What will you say to the kids?
I know first touch around that.
yeah. This is it, because you have something in your head and you want the kids to do that, but you don't know how to communicate into that. And that's how you have to break it into smaller systems, make them understand the concepts, so they understand what you're trying to communicate, so they can implement it. So it's football job. Coaching is not easy because you first need to understand it well yourself, what you're trying to say to the other person. Then you have to break it down into very small parts so that the other person understands. Then you have to build exercises so that the person repeats those motions, actions in competition, so he gets used to the idea of what you're trying to do. And then you build into a bigger system, and then you go to an 11v11. The process is long, and let's say you're focusing on attacking. So there is just no attacking. If you're going to attack in final third, you have to build up first. So you have to also then take care of the build up. Then if you're attacking, there will be a lot of times you will lose the ball. Okay, so immediately you can't. Your player loses the ball and you wanted to coach attacking, and suddenly the ball is going back and most of the session you just defend it. So how do you have to design the session to focus on what you wanted to focus? So everything is connected. So to break down the vision that I see on television to a small session where he understands one simple concept where we're trying to achieve a very little thing is the key to coaching. And this process is not easy. We had a tutor in Spain. He was a physio for club Thierry Henry played in America, MLS. So So he also worked. He had also worked in EPL in one club. He said the EPL coach. I'm not talking about some. He said one EPL coach I worked with. I cannot name you. I used to ask him, what's your game model? What do you want me to focus on? He wanted to build exercises, so which implements his game model. Go 100 passes. Okay, so there are coaches at very high level who do not understand the complexity of football, and they rely on few ideas. You defend well, you go in strong, and you go long, and you go well.
Yeah, so some people don't have this idea of periodization, that how maybe this is the beginning of the season and this is, let's say, my game model and how I want to structure it out for a thing like that. Maybe some people just take a game on game because maybe since when they had been players and when they had been coached, that's the way it had been. So maybe why would I want to, let's say, experiment?
The big development in football is that everything has been breaking down into small levels. That now that every single phase has been optimized to maximum perfection. So the 3-4 phases of the game: attack, defense, transition to attack, transition to defense. The current Premier League winners for past 3-4 years are Conte, Klopp and Guardiola have been the only teams in past 15-20 years which have been dominating every single phase of the game. What do you do immediately after you lose the ball? What do you do immediately after you get the ball? What do you do when you start with the ball? What do you do when the opposition starts with the ball? So every single phase has been optimized to the maximum level. You didn't have too much counter pressing in 2006, 2007. We didn't have the concept of build up. Teams did it, but not too much. Very few teams did it, and not this methodologically as now. So football is actually becoming, the edges are becoming small, and football is also being it's becoming a game of nerds also, which is good as well. It gives us a chance. It gives us a chance because people who don't understand, people who don't make the effort to understand, will be left behind.
No, I think it's very true, and we can look at the best sides in, let's say, if you take the 2006-2007 period, that even Sir Alex Ferguson used to talk about this, that when we play Arsenal, it's not about the ball, it's about kicking them as hard as we can.
Yes.
It doesn't matter because we know that we have to surrender the ball to them. So it's about anything other than being on the ball that we can try to do. That's what Gary Neville used to say very famously. So I think it's like all the other industries. This is that people are getting more and more technical, more and more smarter people who get into the thing.
But Ferguson lost 2 matches to Guardiola in finals, and where he said that we couldn't even touch the ball. No one gave it. So they could kick as much as they want, but there is no one player. So think of football as a network which has a lot of nodes. And what if every node is strong, then just attacking one node won't make. So if you had one midfielder, let's say Ryan Giggs is dominating, you man mark him and the team doesn't know what to do. Well, nowadays if you man mark the centre midfield, you man mark Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne will drop into build play. If you man mark Kevin De Bruyne, someone will open in line for passing lane for Silva will open up. If he's marked, then Gabriel Jesus will come back. If he's marked, Sterling will come inside. There are so many systems to then man marking, and these things have been left a little bit behind. If they're pressing traps, you can attack the space behind. If there are no pressing traps, you can build up. So everything is being now thought of and being implemented. So managers who do that will eventually be left behind.
No, I think that's very true. And something, because I wanted to ask you this question because you are from an engineering background, and Liverpool, I'm pretty sure you must have heard of this, but Liverpool are very data-driven in their approach, in their recruitment, in staff they hire, in the way even they play, even in the way they actually play out their games. There is obviously, let's say, a pressing center to the game, which has reduced actually in the last few years, and we've been implementing more sides to the game, which is a little more possession driven, and what we have to do when we have the ball. That's why we have players like Fabinho come in, players like Van Dijk come in. But I'd like to understand, what is your perspective of data analytics in football and sports in general? Do you think it is only good that we can have things like that, or are you maybe a little old-fashioned to say that there are still things?
Data is obviously very good. First, let's come to recruiting. So, you heard about XG, right? XG.
Yeah, that's my next question.
So, you heard about XG, XA. So, it's a very good way to analyze whether a team is performing as well as like the actual performance of the team and the mathematical performance of the team. You also a very good way to analyze how much a midfielder actually contributes. Progressive passes, XG chain. So I think these parameters are much better than simple eye test. When you combine those with eye test,
it's not perfect right now.
Nothing is
only get better.
Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but it's a huge leap from just simple eye test. It's a huge leap from passes completion. Yes, definitely going to passes completion. So for recruitment purposes, 100%. For strategy purposes also. For example, if I'm a pressing team, this absolutely makes sense. I want to figure out players who are less comfortable on the ball, and I want the ball to go there so I can press. I want the ball to go to their weakest link, and I want to press. And I want to see how much space they leave where, and where do they usually attack from. So I know their patterns, and this has now become very easy from data to understand their patterns of attack, who are their key players. There's a thing called pass maps. I personally build pass maps. I have designed a simple algorithm that takes data from Scored and can build a pass map from any recent match. So you can immediately see who had the most touches, what is their passing network usually, where did the most play go from, what was their formation. There is no way better to tell the team's formation than a pass map. So it's very easy. You quickly look at last 5 games XG, you look at their pass maps, you get a broad idea of how this team plays, who are their key players and where do they attack from. You got one. And you also get to know which are the players they do not pass to as much and which are their... So you can get a lot of idea from data which you can implement. So I'm never anti-data, I'm very pro-data in that regards. But I think all professional clubs will eventually they are using, and but I also do not I do not like concept of going completely 100% data, because there are a lot of things which are besides data which only an eye test can pick up.
I think it comes down to a marriage between, let's say, the technical team. So Klopp, where am I going to go with this? So Klopp's talked about this, and he says that he is very happy to work under a sporting director or someone who is in charge of, let's say, looking at players, looking at things like that, breaking down data, so it's much easier for the coaching team to then, let's say, implement it to the players and give them into that. But it'd be very difficult under Rodgers' era, who didn't, wasn't as tuned in with the data. So even if you get the best players in, like if you get the Firminos, who is maybe undervalued in the market, who is doing good, but if you just play him at left mid, or you play Sterling.
Chelsea had Kevin De Bruyne and Mo Salah, and Mourinho sold them both. So that just validates your point. If someone doesn't want to use it, they don't want to use it. If they don't want to use it, they don't want to use it. So a manager has to be open to data and also understand data. And Arsene Wenger was very, very early in his use of data. I remember he was giving a press conference, and he said when he was in Monaco, then he used to record how many seconds a player held to the ball before passing. And he used to take the data and said, look, you hold the ball a little bit longer, make it faster, so the game goes faster. So data is helpful, but the coaches have to be open for it. If someone doesn't believe it,
do you see yourself working, if you are, let's say in the future, maybe for sure, I think this will happen, but do you think you'd be happy working for the sporting director?
Yes, I would also like to outsource analysis part to someone else, so I can just work on the insights and focus on them. And if they give me the insights which don't make sense, then I can counter them. But I would, because there are only few things you can focus on completely. So I'll be okay with working with an analysis team which gives me the output, and I use that output too.
see, this is a very fascinating point for me because one of the reasons I was drawn to football coaching is that so the team plays in my way. So I'm the boss. I'm the person who takes charge of everything there is. That's why I was attracted to, let's say, the Fergusons, the Wengers of the world, who used to like run the club basically. And now I think I've come to understand that Klopp's obviously very, very important to our club, and I think there are many. But the more important person for this football club currently is the sporting director. You can look at Mikel Zorc at Dortmund. You can look at Seven, for example. I gave Stuart Webber as an example as well, because he is generally the person who's going to lay out, let's say, the information that your teams want to try to play out. So it's just that.
Yeah, but if you make him the coach, things would work. Yeah. And it takes so Klopp has the humility to admit that there is someone who will do the job much better, and it's probably okay to have separation because Klopp is the boss. Klopp is eventually the boss. There's someone behind him which helps him, which is good, and I think it lets him do his job better than trying to manage this. And
wasn't there this quote from Arsene Wenger, who, when he was asked in a press conference, why don't you have a director of football? Why doesn't Arsenal have a director of football? And he said, what's a director of football? Is someone who picks up cones in the traffic area? Have you heard this? Have you heard this?
Yeah. So. Arsene Wenger was a man of exceptional capabilities to do a lot of things himself.
Maybe he just that he was too obsessive and he thought that.
Yeah, he was too obsessive to give any part completely away to the other person. But in the end, so Arsenal did go the data way, and suddenly they did not go the data way. They fired the best data guy in Europe.
Oh yes, what's his name? Sven Mislintat.
Yes. And they got.
But that was he was hired on the Wenger reign, and then he was promised that you will be in charge of recruitment as a whole for us.
Yes. And then eventually they hired agents, people. So look, the good thing about John W. Henry, who by the way is also a trader who made his money trading. He's one of my idols in trading. So John W. Henry, he understands. The owner has to understand.
Have you seen Moneyball?
I haven't seen Moneyball. The only reason I haven't seen Moneyball is just talked about too much. So I can never really.
No, but I know it's fascinating. You have to give it a watch. Yeah. And it has what's his name, man? What's his name?
Billy.
No, Billy Bean's the guy. The person playing. Oh my god. Okay, but yeah, it's a fascinating story and
Brad Pitt, right?
Brad Pitt, of course. How can I forget his name? But yeah, just for Brad Pitt, you have to watch it, man.
Okay.
So it's really fascinating because John Henry actually called Billy Bean in after the Oakland A's performed so well in baseball, and he said that here's a blank check. Take whatever you want. You have to come to the Boston Red Sox. And he said that no, I'm just too heavily invested, which is really odd to say from Billy Bean because he is so data driven now. But yeah, I think he was, let's say, one of the early approaches who was interested in getting data in sports and looking at that.
Right.
And Billy Bean, I think he's recently talked about getting artificial intelligence into sports, which I find interesting. I don't know how it pan out.
It's just artificial intelligence has become the biggest buzzword. First we what does that mean? Someone has to break it down. What do you mean artificial intelligence? What do you mean by it? You just can't say artificial intelligence. You have to go a little deeper. What do you mean by it?
No, not you, but I'm saying the person who's saying it.
Maybe it's a computer system, a system that can think for itself. Maybe
to do what?
To do the tasks that do make it that maybe it takes time for us to do. Maybe breaking down a lot of Excel sheets into.
No. Specific to football. What would an artificial intelligence?
Maybe exactly. Let's say the way the data is collected, maybe that can be done through artificial intelligence. The way we process our Facebook feeds, that is artificial intelligence, which suggests us things that we don't know. That is good that we may like, but we actually it knows basically much more about us than we know about ourselves.
Right. So someone could build an algorithm hypothetically, which could tell you in advance what game model.
Maybe some player who you may not have thought of would be better for you. Or maybe looking at progressive passes, that's the way we are looking at it. Maybe that's very primitive.
Artificial intelligence is data science. Data science is artificial intelligence. They are used in interchangeably because artificial intelligence sounds.
Because I'm so fascinated about this, and there's this great documentary on YouTube. It's called, it's made by this company DeepMind, who've I don't know if you've heard about this game called Go. So Go is the most complex board game in the whole world. It's 25 times more complex than chess. Chess has, for every chess move, there's 25 combinations on the chessboard.
Okay.
For every Go move, there's 250 combinations on the chessboard.
Okay.
So this company called DeepMind in London designed this computer system which taught itself how to play.
Yes.
And it beat the world champion of Go from South Korea 4-1.
Yeah.
So if maybe a computer system can design looking at what Bielsa does basically, but doesn't have to sit 14 hours a day looking at clips.
You could, I don't know. For example, board game is easy. You don't have humans, you have pieces.
Isn't what
physical.
Tesla doing something similar? Obviously,
It's machine. It's just machine. You don't have.
But
humans.
machines are trying to interpret what
How do
humans
you
will do.
implement models on humans?
But no, so it may give us, let's say, a way to look at the game. And then
I'm not saying I'm a skeptic. I'm just saying let things come. Let's see first. So problems which are which do not problems which are easier to solve, which do not require humans as part of the system, are easier to solve by artificial intelligence. When we have players, then your what I think, I don't know, I'm not an expert. So your variable is too variable. The person is too variable. So I don't know. Let's see where data science goes in football. But I'm all for data, and whenever I can use data, I will use data.
Okay, I have to ask you about Arteta because I'm a big fan of his turtlenecks and the way he trims his beard and the way he's trying to put forward football across his Arsenal. But what do you think of Mikel Arteta? Because I have to put out this conversation. So one of the coaching sessions that you oversaw mine. So I think we were talking about Wenger, and I don't know if you recall the conversation. And I thought that are you Wenger in, Wenger out? And then I asked you if you are Wenger out, which you didn't say you were. But who would you rather have in place? Or maybe in the long term, who would you like to succeed? And you said that I really like Arteta because he is from the Wenger school and he is very methodical. He looks at the game which is very similar to Pep, very similar to Wenger. And you were one of the few first people who actually propagated his name because that time was also fashionable to be talked about in the media that Arteta is a new manager for Arsenal Football Club.
So first of all, you have to also like a person. So Arteta is also a person who, when he was Arsenal captain, he used to give interviews which used to give out a message about how he's sort of a person. When Arsenal won the FA Cup, he said, "We won the FA Cup, but for the stature of this club, I think it's not enough, and we have to do more." So if you ever see him talking, he's a guy who wants to build and he wants to take things forward and he wants to do proper way. He's right now ruffling feathers at the club because he thinks that some things are unacceptable and shouldn't be done a certain way. So you need strong-minded individuals who have the philosophy of their own who will to give time to. And I think Arteta has been first of all he's played under Wenger and then he's been coached really, like he's learned everything that Guardiola probably has to teach. So I think there couldn't have been a better combination of two. So what I was saying to you, a person who is completely methodological but also has the management side. So that could be Arteta. I'm very hopeful. I hope the club and board support him.
Do you like the first looks, maybe the way he's trying to put forward Arsenal?
I think he does not have the players right now. I think Arsenal does not have the players right now. Arsenal does not have a midfield to hold on to the ball. Arsenal has one good striker. Arsenal have a couple of good strikers, but I don't think Arsenal has the forward structure to support our attacking style of play right now. So he's beaten Liverpool, he's beaten Manchester City, but he's beaten them in a way using a different game model.
Yeah, of course, they had like 2 shots against us.
Yeah.
And both were goals. He's demonstrated an ability to just adapt to what he has right now, and he's pressurizing the board to get it. I think if there is a person who Arsenal has to give a couple of years or 3 years, 4 years, it's Arteta, because I don't see any other manager who understands the club that well. He's been there, he's been the captain, he's been there for 5 years, and who understands the Arsenal fans and Arsenal fan base, and who also is a modern manager who's not Kenny Dalglish to come in and take the club forward. So
yeah, it's very similar to Bielsa school of thought when you mentioned that he is clearly pointing out in his first few press conferences that this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and I want it this way because otherwise I'm not going to coach, because that's what Bielsa did. He said that if he doesn't like something, or so he is very ideological in that sense. So if the owners have promised him certain players or certain money that he can spend in the transfer window and then that's not happening, then he leaves. So I think it is very similar when you look at Arteta in that sense. But maybe Arteta will give it more time because he is emotionally more vested to Arsenal than Bielsa was to his clubs. But so have you? I know you probably heard this of this anecdote that Raheem Sterling became the goal scoring machine is because of Arteta. He said that we understand you may not be the most clinical of finishers, but what you can do in the penalty box is that take another touch, because you reach the penalty box so early that you often take a shot too early and it becomes easy for the goalkeeper. So even if you take another shot just before putting the ball at the back of the net, it will be more helpful. And turns out that Sterling scored a bunch of goals playing centre forward and even right wing.
Sane and Sterling, both things. One thing he did with the wingers is that he gave them that don't worry about the result, you just go for the dribble and you beat your man, and then it's up to you, because this was from I thought this was from Wenger's school of thought, which he implemented with the wingers. And do not worry, you lose the ball, but go. So that was last season when Sane and Sterling were both firing from both ends, and had a very high 1v1 winning percentage in their wings. So Guardiola rates him very high.
Exactly. City
rate him very high. They probably would have wanted him as manager if Guardiola went. I don't think there is any reason for Arsenal fans to be pessimist at the moment. Only thing is how much investments and how many players Arsenal gets, and how interesting it can be. But I'm really excited to see how the next season goes.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end. I think we've just done 2 hours, man. I think it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure speaking to you. I hope we can do sometime again. Just anything for the viewers where they can find your work, anything on your social medias, feel free to.
My Twitter handle is InFinalThird. So you can see me at InFinalThird on Twitter. That's about it. If you there'll be a link to my trading account as well. If you want to see that, it's okay. If you want to invest your money, you can directly call him for my number. And that's about it. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.